panel discussion of the day. This one is about understanding and motivating your hybrid workforce. In the dynamic landscape of the hybrid workforce, leaders need to understand the distinct needs and aspirations of their workforce, remote or on-site. What approaches can leaders employ to gain a deeper understanding of the unique motivations and preferences of their hybrid workforce? We'll also be asking, how can organizations tailor their motivation strategies to effectively engage both remote and on-site employees, fostering productivity, overall satisfaction, and psychological safety? This group will discuss all of this and more, and moderating this discussion, I'm pleased to welcome back Lydia Dishman to the virtual stage. Lydia, as I said earlier, is the Senior Editor for Growth and Engagement at Fast Company. Lydia, we're glad to have you moderating this session. Please take it away.
Thank you so much. And thanks everybody for sticking around and joining us for yet another insightful panel discussion. I wanted to start by saying that if you've tuned in before, you know that we've talked with previous panels about how everything from benefits to deciding where work gets done has become increasingly personalized. We know that there are no one-size-fits-all solutions to many of our current workplace conundrums, and motivating a hybrid workforce and a distributed team is no different. It's essential to recognize that motivation is a complex and multifaceted phenomenon, and individual motivations can vary widely based on personality, circumstances, context, even recognition. I was listening to the previous presentation by Rob. Even recognition needs to be approached with the individual in mind, because not everybody wants to get called out in a meeting or in a more public way, for example. But we do know that once you figure out what works for the person, recognize it, because what gets recognized gets repeated. So thanks for that little lesson. But back to this, researchers continue to study and refine all their theories around motivation to get deeper understandings about the intricacies, but we are going to the front lines now, talking to these professionals about what's working right now. So I'm going to ask them each to introduce themselves briefly. Tell us what's been the most motivating factor for you over the past couple of years. And Casey, I'm going to start with you.
Thank you. Happy to be here. I'm Casey. I'm one of the founders here of Attuned, and what we do is software to look at everybody's intrinsic motivation for work. So very much that personalized component, so you can see it no matter how big that organization is. And very soon we'll be releasing the ability to measure psychological safety within teams. So you have that strong individual to individual component and that team measurement component. For me, the last couple of years have been survival. And if I look at my own intrinsic motivator change, it's my kindness, my actually altruism has gone up. So I think that's what's been motivating me to be kinder.
Amazing. Well, thank you for sharing that. And we need as many kind people in the world right now as we can get. Mary, how about you go next?
Hi, everyone. My name is Mary Burke, and I'm the Senior Vice President of Human Resources for Experian. We are a large global enterprise with over 22,000 employees. And for a large enterprise, we are still very much in a remote or flex first environment. We are actually very cautious about using the word hybrid, because for some of our employees, hybrid means there are requirements to be in the office at some period of time. So we are trying to enforce a flex policy while we're trying to engage our remote teams. We also have goals to increase organic on-site presence so that we foster the connection. I think for me, what has motivated me the most in the last few years is really fostering the connections I have. As somebody who is a natural extrovert and thrive on relationships, and not being able to really feed my soul and during the pandemic, I really value the connections that I have, not necessarily have to be in person, but really making meaningful connections to help me advance my work here at Experian.
Oh, amazing. Thank you for sharing that. As a fellow extrovert, yes, it's been challenging to say the least. Andrea, how about you go next?
Hi, I'm Andrea Osborne. I am the VP of HR for the Genesis Cloud organization, and we're the R&D organization of Genesis. Genesis is a B2B software company that is the global leader in experience as a service, helping other organizations develop a very personalized customer experience. So a key part of that is the employee experience, and which really ties together for me of what's been motivating for the last couple of years is really seeing the workplace become more human-centered and people being able to bring their whole self to work. And how do you foster that within an organization that's very dynamic, because we're in over 100 countries, 6,000 employees. So a lot of diversity in a very, medium-sized company, but small package.
Yeah, but a massive global scale. And I love the concept of bringing your whole self to work. And I continue to watch with both joy and trepidation as this it continues to evolve. But thank you for sharing that. Kristen?
Hi, I'm Kristen Duffy. I'm the head of our IT people operations and chief of staff to our CIO at National Instruments. Actually, I should say the test and measurement business group at Emerson, because the acquisition closed today. So we're going through a lot of change as a company.
Okay.
So yes, my team focuses on IT employee engagement and development. I think the biggest motivating factor for me over these last couple of years is seeing how everybody has really adapted to the changes, right? Our workforce is hybrid primarily, and we were remote for so long in the pandemic and seeing everybody switch to that, but then it really was an adjustment coming back from that and moving to our hybrid model. And so just listening to others through the change and having everybody be very, very kind. I know that was said earlier, but I think that's the most motivating.
That's totally fine. And like I said, we could use all the kindness we can get because the world is a chaotic place right now. So thank you for sharing that. Congrats on the close of this. So now you're going to have to change your your little sign on your screen. Yeah. Okay. Well, so I want to dive into the discussion. Casey, I'm going to come to you first for some context setting. Can you start by telling us what motivational factors, especially those that are Attuned is measuring, are emerging as most critical to the way we work right now?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually the data, so we have access as a B2B software company to a lot of data, intrinsic motivation data, and it's really supporting what my fellow panelists have said. So as Andrea mentioned, it's becoming more human-centered is where we see the trends in the data. And we've got our state of motivation reports, our annual report showing these trends coming out relatively soon. And kindness is going up. Social relationships, people's desire to have that connection that Mary mentioned is going up. Progress is going up, innovation. So I think these kind of creative, more human kind of forces, we see trending higher. On the other side, the need for money, the need for respect or status, competition, kind of that other, it's human, certainly, but that's trending down as we look across the big data. So I'd say, kindness, connectivity, and creativity. To summarize, our big data is what is trending across the world for motivation.
As motivation, that's really wonderful. I'm interested to hear about if you could just dig in a little bit more about why you think that competition is trending down. I mean, it's obviously sort of not. It doesn't play well with kindness. So, what is that about?
I think it's very much a volatile world. So we've heard of VUCA a lot, and I think we've all really experienced it in our bones quite deeply, how much the world is changing, how much we have to adapt. That was mentioned by Kristen earlier. And I think there's probably a tiredness of that in competition where we have to fight to get that, to get the reward or have a zero-sum type of game. It's more, okay, we need to work together, and we've come out that this connectivity and what is making us more human to be able to adapt. Like we can't do it by ourselves anymore, whether it's an organization or a team or anything to be able to create and survive. So I think it's a lot of the big macro trends that have really affected our life, and the data that we look at is this value hierarchy of everybody for work. So this is really imprinted on us in a chemical way. So if we've experienced something deeply difficult, that starts to change our values. And I think that's where we're seeing the differences.
Mary, I want to come to you next because I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about this Flex First situation that you have there, where your employees are working, how leadership is determining what works best for everyone.
Yeah, so we have, we are, North America headquarters is here in Costa Mesa. And when we returned to the office, we sent out a survey on what will be their primary work location. And we had about 90% of employees choose home as their primary work location, with a definition that 50% or more of their time spent will be in their primary work location. So what we found, we have employees that live 5 miles from Costa Mesa and choose to be a remote employee.
Mhm.
And so we have doubled down on the power of choice and have observed all the return to office mandates that other companies are trying to enforce, and they are achieving a high non-compliance rate. And so what we're trying to do at least is we've learned that people come to the office not to work, but to actually connect. And so we spend a lot of time fostering connecting days. Like we'll have collaboration Thursdays where we ask our leaders, hey, no remote meetings, try your best to be available. And people come in and they connect and, we eat together. And so that in itself, I think, fosters the connection that I think is what we really want versus people in the office. And so what we're trying to do is make that one day a week a great experience so that people continue to come in one day a week. And and so now we try to invite everybody 50 miles from the office to come in one day a week. If you can't, great. If you're here, hey, it's going to be a great day.
Yeah, and it's actually, I've found as I've talked to various leaders at different companies that it's demotivating to push those mandates, that people have to want to be there. And so if you're, if you build it, they will come, sort of. And so I'm thinking that these connectivity days are really kind of a big motivator for a lot of people, whether they're introverts or extroverts. Andrea, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. We're very similar in that we're very focused on flexible within Genesis, but we have a lot of global teams. So I have, some relatively junior managers that are managing people in 4 countries, as an example. So they're never with their teams. It's just, and that's one extreme, but then we have others that are centered in, let's just say, Raleigh or Indianapolis, where they are together. But for those local teams, more than half are flexible and declared not coming into the office on a regular basis. So it's an interesting dynamic to manage through. And what we're really, at our major locations, we have what we call experience coordinators, and their job is about what are they doing to engage the community with those site leaders and owners so that they are really driving an experience. And on the other hand, for teams that are much more distributed, really trying to encourage managers to create work events that make sense for their teams to come together, because that connection is so important. So whether it's they're going to gather to work on how we'll deploy the next iteration of a project, but having a real purpose to come together and then building the fun around that so that they really do have that reason to come together.
Did you want to add, Mary?
No, just
okay.
we are aligned on the approach for sure. Nodding in agreement.
Yes. Okay. Well, Kristen, I want to build on this concept a little bit, because I know that one of the biggest issues with returning to the office, as I said, is that many people just aren't motivated to sit somewhere other than their comfy couch. I know that for me personally, I love to come here. It's nice to get away from my space and then come back to it, to have that separation. But what do you find helps get over that initial, I just would like to sit in my comfy pants on my comfy couch?
Right. I mean, I feel like people are definitely split between the two. So at NI, we actually have it functionally decided for IT that we come into the office 2 days a week. And so, we have hit this problem with people not wanting to come in. And so I think the biggest thing is really making that office time purposeful. right? Like, do you want to come into the office and sit in Zoom meetings? No, that doesn't make sense, right? So there is some flexibility there. But I think also getting the message across is that as a company, we value connection. And sometimes we understand if you're a developer and it's not as productive for you to come into the office, that's okay. We want you to make those connections. We want you to build those relationships because there's a lot of goodness that comes out of the collaboration. How we kind of try to make it more purposeful is we defined as a company what activities really are better in person. You know, are your stakeholders in the office? When are they in the office? Do we have a big workshop that's coming up? Do we need to, you know, have that one-to-one conversation about dependencies? And then also we really want to provide those opportunities to connect. And it's not just social events. I think we've all seen kind of the meme on social media where it's my employer's providing pizza to entice me to come. Okay, that's not doing it for me. We want to make sure that we have not just social activities, but service activities that could be off-site, but you're still together building that connection. Also providing training and development when you're in the office as an alternative to being online. So I think, you know, trying to entice employees through that connection piece is really what we're going for.
I'm glad that you brought up the training and development piece, because I know that certainly 3 years ago, when we were still trying to figure out this new way to work, a lot of the learning and development professionals were saying that, oh, it's actually better for people not to have to come together and sit in a classroom all day or 3 days in a row or something like that, that they could do it on their own time and digest the. So let's just all together talk a little bit about that piece of this. Like, what motivates people to come together to learn versus digesting it on their own? Casey, do you have some insight to set some context?
I'll do my best.
Okay.
In some of kind of the projects that we worked with, large executive training programs across the world, is learning isn't just what we read, right? You know, and what we look at or intake or kind of perceive. And logically, I think with how you opened it is, you know, it would seem if we could just focus on the material, we're going to learn a lot more. But there's peer-based learning, right? And there's actual trial-based, being challenged to get out of your comfort zone. And that getting out of your comfort zone and also learning from your peers, like statistically, has a higher percentage for staying in somebody's brain for actually learning. So I think getting people to learn and experience and grow together, where you can do it with other people and have those shared experiences and get that emotional, you know, chemical drop on your brain, that's going to stay in there a little bit longer.
And now
Can I
I'm
build
curious,
on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say, how do you sell this?
Because I think it's super important. It depends on what you're learning and what you're trying to do. If you're trying to drive a real change in behavior, there's some learning you can do, right? And different people learn in different ways, but it's really about what level of learning you're really trying to drive. So like, if we're trying to drive kind of a change in leadership behavior, we find there's some really good use of some offline work, and then really coming together so you can challenge and dialogue and maybe problem solve together as part of your learning experience. Because I think there's a real strength in solving a problem together as part of your learning, so that it's not just theoretical. You start to use your learning in solving a problem. We've been doing a lot with design thinking that are kind of staged for hybrid and in-person events around the globe with certain leaders, and it's really paying off to help solve company problems and build the leadership learning into it at the same time.
Mary, Kristen, you want to build on that?
I think for Experian, people are motivated to celebrate when they come to the office. And so when we celebrate, for example, diversity events, Lunar New Year, it brings in the most number of employees in the office when they know it is celebrating something that they're passionate about. The second most attended event is when we host community service, where we make gift bags, you know, for children or bikes, or there's a sense of community that we want to foster. And so for us, coming to the office is not about working. It is really about connecting. because similar to Andrea, we grew so rapidly during the pandemic that if they were to come to the office, they would just get on the call, on video and,
Yeah, that happens
work
too.
with somebody that we
Absolutely.
hired in Florida.
Mhm.
And so it's not really about working. It's really about connecting, and that's what's worked. And that's all we're asking for.
Well, and I think it's interesting too, is that, while these are opportunities to connect and celebrate and have some community, there are some learnings going on in there as well, because like, if you are having a Lunar New Year celebration, for example, not everybody celebrates Lunar New Year. So what can you learn
Yes,
in
it
a
is.
sort of low key kind of way that, it's not sort of
Yes.
like a classroom learning. So that's kind of what Casey was saying was,
Yes.
you get the drop. I love that.
But it's also a way to celebrate what we do best. So anytime we have a great place to work survey or an employee net promoter score, our number one, the cornerstone of who we are is our culture. And so we tend to lean towards our culture. If culture is what brings people here, how do we celebrate our culture through in-person events? And so really every time they come, it's a celebration of our culture.
Yeah, I see that. Kristen, did you want to add?
Well, I just wanted to add that when we do come together for these connection events, I think one of the important pieces of it is getting to know people outside of your team and really networking, which helps with that learning and development piece, right? Like you can have connections that, hey, you can call and you can talk virtually with and utilize them and learn things from them. But if you weren't ever in the same room with them, it's much harder. You can do it, but it's much harder to build those kind of one-off connections, people not on your team.
Absolutely. And I want to dig into that particular piece of it a little bit more as well. Andrea, I'm going to come to you because you had mentioned something about the first-time managers working with people that they had never met before and distributed everywhere. How are you integrating and motivating these people because they've never maybe been inside the office?
Yeah, and I think it's an evolution for everybody, right? We're learning what works well in this environment. I personally have been working remote and mobile for 20 years. So it's kind of second nature to me in some respects. But there's this piece of each team kind of customizing what works for them, but it can't be ad hoc. It's got to be intentional. So as a company, we have to provide tools to our managers of what to think about, how to navigate the environment, and then allow them to build what works for their team, potentially within some broader construct, right? Whether it's come in one day a week or make sure you attend the local events. But some of our folks don't have local events. I myself live in Colorado and there is no local office, but there happen to be 40 of us in Colorado. So we do get together. Like next Thursday is our community give back day across the company globally. And so we're getting together to build meals at a shelter. So there are things you can do to really make sure that each team can customize it to their work and what works for them and their preferences, whether they're developers or communications professionals or an HR team. And there's a lot of help you need to provide to make sure that managers and their teams are being intentional about bringing their team together to build that trust, build the psychological safety that Casey's talking about, because all of that is what makes this work. And if you aren't transparent and intentional about it, it will fall flat for at least some of your community, and then you can't deliver the results you need to as a company.
And not every company has the resources to train managers at quite that level, and especially the larger the organization, the more difficult it is to disseminate these lessons to frontline managers. And unfortunately, these poor souls are shouldering a lot, especially over the last 3 years. But what I'm particularly thinking about is it never gets old for me personally, even though I'm reading and writing about this all the time, is what are the best ways to engage people virtually? What have we learned over the past 3 years? What's working and what's not? I was talking to Larissa at the top of this conference at the fireside chat, you know, everybody's done the sort of virtual coffee or cocktail. Everybody's done the, what I like to call mandatory fun. What else can we do to engage people and motivate them virtually, especially on video calls or in hybrid meetings? Casey, once again, starting with you.
Yeah, I'll give it a go once again. I think just some things that we're doing is going back to, at least for me, going back to older technology and just doing phone calls and voice, right? And
Oh, wow.
you know, when
Okay.
we're staring at each other like this, it's transactional. There's a bit, you know, where we're kind of asserting against somebody else. But if you can go back to the voice and just listen to the texture, you know, of our timbre and what we're talking about and everything that conveys, you know, the human qualities, the emotions that go into just having the voice. And I think one thing that misses for that connectivity when we're remote and hybrid and sitting through a lot of meetings is there's a formation, like a mountain formation. Like if you can get two people like this, so when we sit together in cars and we're driving somewhere or we're sitting on a bench, that's usually when we start to open up, when we fix our gaze at something into the distance and we're not looking at each other, we tend to have our most human, our most honest, our most kind of connective type of conversations like that. And how can we replicate this hybrid? And you can't do it just staring this way, right? So a phone call,
That's
maybe
very
walking
true.
around, getting our limbic brain going. So those are some kind of old school techniques that trying to do to bring back that human connectivity.
Yeah, that's such an incredible point that you raised. And I don't know if anyone has any teenagers in their life and you are struggling to talk to them. The best place to do it is if you are side by side in a vehicle, because you are not looking at them and they are not looking at you. And then all of a sudden the conversation flows. Ask me how I know. But yeah, let's do a little bit of a round robin on this one, because I really want to hear some more best practices for engaging virtually. Kristen.
Yeah, so we haven't tried the phone calls yet, but we have done you know, best practices of having your camera on, because making sure, you know, if you're a little dot, we don't know if you're, you know, if you're really truly engaged with the conversation or not. So we feel like that, like looking at each other is makes it very personal. Raising hands, making sure that we have someone monitoring the online attendees, because a lot of times it is a hybrid meeting for us. And so, you know, making sure that we're thinking about being inclusive and really having someone look and be like, wait, you know, Andrea has her hand up, or hey, there's something in the chat. That's kind of how at least our meeting best practices. And then going back to just some of the things for our leaders is making sure that, you know, you have those frequent one-on-one interactions, to Casey's point about, you know, having two people there. But making sure that you're having those informal conversations too, and not just strictly focused on work. So you're learning about, you know, the person and making them feel, again, included and learning more about them.
Mary?
So a couple of things we do for high engagement. And so we try our best to level the playing field for meetings where we have the most number of employees. So we will always have town halls for all virtual, so that the experience is the same for all employees. Secondly, we try to use tools that foster engagement. So there's some tools like GoToMeeting, where it's more of a live webcast, but we choose Microsoft Teams specifically because there's more engagement in chat. There's an ability to send emojis and claps, and sometimes seeing all these activities and emojis make it more of an engaging experience versus just attending a webcast call. So we were able to figure out how to run Teams meetings on Teams. And then similar to the teenager analogy, I tell my team and comms team that second to scroll on social media, you should be able to capture the attention of that person, right? Because everyone has sort of a short attention span with how information is distributed. And so anytime we have comms, it's never really on email, it's always Slack, and it's positioned where there's a headline, you scroll, and if you like it, you click. And I think that's a better way of communicating and making sure that information is disseminated. And we use a lot of digital video engagement, even if it's just for 1 minute. because we find, especially with the digital natives in our workforce, a video by phone under 1 minute, actually, we have higher engagement than actually an email or text. And so just these little tweaks on how we distribute information and how we engage, I think makes a huge difference in terms of engagement.
Absolutely. Andrea?
I think that's really important, Mary, of partnering with your comms team of how you're engaging in that particular space and how messages are delivered is super important. I think there's all managers have best practices of what's working for them. So you got to figure out a way to mine that in your own environment and ask employees, right? What works for you? We are doing some connect events at all of our major sites right now where they're really working through getting those best practices surfaced from the employee base up to leadership and helping with identify that. Because at the end of the day, the employees kind of know what works well for them, and how do you get that as well as the management best practices surfaced is super important. There's two like super basic things that I've tried that I love when I can do it. And actually today's a nice enough day where I might be able to do it. Try to take some of your meetings while walking. So get up out of your desk, talk to your team, walk, and you can't be on video, you have to be on the phone, but you're outside and you're getting that own wellness for yourself and demonstrating that for your employees to get away from your desk. Super important as far as working from home. And I think the other piece there is making time for that super personal interaction. There's a lot of tasks, there's a lot of things going on when we're in a Zoom meeting or even in one-on-ones with our employees or with our teams. You can see people are multitasking. People are doing 3 things, trying to answer emails, working on the channel.
Yes.
So how do you get more mindfulness and just being present in the moment? You can get a heck of a lot more done if everybody's present for 15 minutes than multitasking for a half hour. So how do you structure the meeting? How do you structure the dialogue so that you're really listening with empathy and in tune with the person and what's happening in that moment and with the team? I think you can get a lot more done that way.
Yeah, 100%. I'm thinking about, again, the manager's role, the leader's role in all of this and what they need to be mindful of, what skills they need that they may not even know they need to get people motivated. And, there are obviously Attuned is offering data on these very things, like what exactly motivates, particular team members. But what do the managers themselves need? What are the top, let's say, 3 skills, Casey?
Maybe I can throw out one. I would say they need feedback, like fast feedback cycle. So I'll leave 2 for my fellow panelists to fill out. But I think you stated it like poor souls, and especially like first-time frontline managers, like they are poor souls. Like there's so much getting squished from both directions, and
Right.
now with hybrid, and okay, how do we make all of these connections, and how do I get to understand everybody? And it's very, very difficult. My thought, and this is kind of one of the reasons that we created Attuned, is just as humans, our brains aren't able to deal with all of this, and especially all of the tasks as a manager, and we need superpower. So all of this psychological data around us, how can we actually use it, get this in a timely way to make those kind of connections? Because, our typical brain can only remember 150 people, right? There's only 50 people that we can invite to, well, not only can, but 50 people we invite to a party, 15 people who we know how they're emotionally going to react. And these are kind of the evolutionary biology. So how can we go beyond that? And we need the feedback and we need the data. So I would say feedback is the one I can contribute.
Okay. Kristen?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds very, very simple, but I really think it's our listening skills and being there for our employees. One thing that I like to suggest to some of my managers is, take the time each week after you've had your week, probably on Friday is usually when this happens, but, review what you think each employee needs and take that, that's kind of your own personal focus time to focus on your team and really intentionally think about what they need as you've heard through them throughout the week.
Andrea?
I'd say transparency, because I like those 2 as well, but that requires a level of transparency and openness of, the managers won't have all the answers. They can sometimes you don't take the monkey, but you can take the monkey and go find out, right? And have some of those difficult conversations. But you're a human being too. You're not an automaton, you're a manager, and it is tough and you're getting pushed from both sides. So there's a level of transparency and openness with your team of just being human with each other instead of, that positional awareness. And it helps build trust. And I think it's just really critical to make the time for it in this environment.
Mary?
I'm going to go take a little bit of a curveball here, but I feel like self-awareness is most important leading virtually, because the more aware you are, self-aware you are, the easier to empathize with your employees. And sometimes it's a different skill set to actually be able to say, Lydia, you don't seem like something's up today. Like I can tell, and being able to tell in a virtual environment, I think is a skill. And so whenever we have executive leadership interviews, I usually am at the start of the interview to try to see can this leader actually connect virtually? And I find that leaders with self-awareness are able to really connect without having to be in person. And so, for lack of a better description, I feel like self-awareness for leaders is going to be really important in leading in a remote and virtual environment.
I think that's very valid. I think self-awareness is a component of emotional intelligence, which allows people to connect more deeply with others. And well, we can certainly use a lot more of that, again, as I said, alongside the kindness. So my next question then is, how are we measuring engagement? Because motivated employees are engaged employees. So let's talk about some of the ways that you all are measuring engagement. Andrea?
So we have an annual and quarterly employee experience index that we assess our entire team around. We survey the whole company once a year, and then about a third in each of the other 3 quarters. And we're looking at what we're calling moments of impact, but they're really the key elements of the organization: onboarding and offboarding on our bookends, and a number of different factors around that, as well as in what we call engage, develop, and perform for the centerpieces of the employee life cycle, and assessing trust in leadership and some of those elements, and really trying to look at the whole employee life cycle on a regular basis, trends and by employees, and also connecting that data to diversity data and attrition demographics, so we can look at how the organization is really doing from an overall health perspective.
Amazing. Kristen?
I mean, ours is very similar to Andrea's. I think one thing that we do have that we added this, I guess this has been our second year to add it, is really specific questions about people's work modes, is what we call them. We ask them we know what their work mode is, and then we have a series of questions about are they feeling included? Do they feel connected to the organization? Do they feel valued? But really making sure that section about our hybrid work, or our remote workers, or even some that we have on site full time, what do the demographics look like, and how is it split up as far as they're feeling valued?
Mary?
We have several surveys, of course, very active listening strategies, but what I found to be the most effective is the employee net promoter score. Where it's one question: would you refer Experian to a friend, scale of 1 to 10, and to be a promoter, you actually have to score a 9. So I feel like the bar is really high for that score, and it's simple. We get high participation because it's one question. So low effort with high impact.
Yeah, the one question survey is, does it get any better? Casey, you're nodding. I want to ask you this question. I know you're going to come at it with a different perspective, but measuring engagement.
So actually through our software, you can measure everybody's motivation vary individually. So it's not
Yes.
just shooting everybody the same question, where you can give bad data in. So like if you ask me about high competition needs, and I'm saying, hey, Casey, are you satisfied with your competition? And I say yes, it can be bad data. So what we do is try to get the very specific, what is most meaningful to each individual for that point. But what we find kind of working with our customers is, whether, our customers are measuring it in a pulse survey every 2 weeks, every month, every quarter, every year. For the managers crushed in the middle, it's what do I do? So what do I do? I want to improve things, and they're really struggling with what to do. And, you can get the data and they get overwhelmed, right? There's analysis paralysis that you can go. So we're trying to make things at SMT, that was just before our session, that specific, meaningful, timely. What is a specific thing that a manager can do easily without having to think too much? And I think that's the core point that as organizations, we have to deliver to.
Yeah. And you're hinting at this, but the overall sense of being burdened by too much information and the analysis paralysis, that's such a real thing with people suffering from burnout right now. And it's true, our brains can only handle whatever the network of 150 people and smaller groups. And I do think that the ability to motivate people in such a personalized way, to be able to listen to people, is such a critical thing that I feel personally is going to inform the way that we work in hybrid environments in the future. So my last round robin question, speed round, because we're running out of time, but where do you see hybrid work going next? Who's going to be the brave soul that raises their hand first on this?
I will go. I will say it. I do think it's going to go to a 4-day work week, especially for us, because we are so flex. We let people manage their time. We are not adopting hybrid. It's pure flex, however you want to manage your time. But we are also getting very granular on OKRs.
Okay.
And so it's affecting the level of trust that we need. And I think that's the foundation of Great Place to Work.
Great. Well, very motivating to have a 4-day work week. Andrea.
I'd love to see flexible and hybrid expand, and us just we need to get even better at how we engage in those communities. I think it's going to be an evolution. I think it's going to be a journey, but I've been doing this for a long time, like I said earlier, and it allows people to navigate everything that is part of their life. And we've got to find ways to better blend work and life together so that people can do their best work.
Kristen?
Yeah, I feel like once COVID hit, everybody really realized how much their personal life we need to be more flexible to allow for kids or taking care of parents, things like that. And so I think that's like the bar right now, or kind of the baseline, right? And so I think that in the future, we have to continue with the flexibility, and I think it's going to continue. I think we're still going to have those moments where the pendulum swings, right? We have people saying, hey, we've got to come back in, and I think we'll settle somewhere in the middle, but a little bit further to the flexible work side.
Casey, take us home.
Yeah. So just about that personal, I've got a
look at that.
So I hope it never goes back to, full-time in work. And I think the ability with hybrid to have the personal lives and to kind of share these moments is really, really important. And I think the ability to care, whether it's kids or somebody else, is incredibly important. And what Andrea mentioned is really sophistication. I think it's a journey from here. So how can we get more sophisticated in these practices to keep all the human side of that hybrid work so we can have a more enriching life and enjoy moments of our life, but get that in-person connectivity and that creativity and those kind of coffee kind of conversations that come and kind of build those as well. So how do we bring those? And it's probably not going to be something super revolutionary, or it's just going to be slow, steady sophistication as organizations get better at this.
Well, that is a wrap for us. Mary, Kristen, Andrea, and Casey, thank you so much for being with me. I love these discussions, and I hope to see you all again very soon. Steve?